of her police interview. So the case being investigated is that of Chris Watts and the triple murder of 15-week pregnant Shanann Watts, Celeste Watts, and Bella Watts, ages 34, 3, and 4 respectively. So Chris was husband to Shanann and father to Celeste and Bella, who unfortunately he had murdered his pregnant wife and 2 children. He first smothered them and then disposed of the children's bodies in the oil tanks located at his work. He worked at a petroleum company as a field coordinator. So Shanann and the children were reported missing on August 13th of 2018, and there was an investigation that happened at the house. And despite finding her car, her keys, her phone, the children's medications, and all of the other personal belongings, there was no results, and they could not find the 3 of them. The search was widespread and prominent throughout the media. I had even heard about it here in Ontario, despite the disappearances occurring in Colorado. So continued. The police caught a break finally in the case when Watts' neighbor had a video camera on his property that actually caught Chris backing his truck up into the garage in the early hours of the morning. Chris admitted that he was not happy in his marriage during a live TV interview, and Shanann had sent texts to her friends revealing that Chris had said he did not want to have their 3rd child, who she was actually already pregnant with. So enter Nicole Kessinger, who was a young woman who ended up actually working with Chris at the petroleum company. And it was found out that they would be having an affair at the time of the disappearances/murders. So Nicole had stated that Chris had told her he was separated amidst some divorce proceedings, and they were actually in the process of selling the house when the affair had started. However, once Nicole had heard in the news that Chris's family had disappeared and that Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant, it was evident that they were still in a relationship, and she immediately contacted police to give a statement. So in the end, Chris was ultimately charged with the murder of his wife and 2 daughters and was sentenced to life without parole in November of 2018. So who is Nicole? I will elaborate a little bit more and as to why she is relevant. So the person being investigated is Nicole Kessinger in the video. She was a geologist and a Colorado native, and she is now better known as the girlfriend of Chris Watts, the man who was convicted of slaying his wife and children. She had an affair with Watts that began only a few weeks before the triple murder took place. And due to her role in the investigation, she had actually asked to be put into witness protection, and she wanted to have her name changed legally. So both interviews with Nicole were done on her terms, and she was there on a voluntary basis. It was actually her idea to go in there and provide information to the police. The first interview was to give her initial statement, which she wanted to do after learning that Chris had lied to her about having a wife, and it was about 2 hours in length. And the second was because she had remembered some important information that could be relevant to the investigators. And that second interview was about 2 hours in length. So questions asked of Ms. Kessinger. I noticed that there was a couple different types of questions, a bunch of open-ended ones and a bunch of clarifying questions were what really jumped out at me. So right from the beginning of the video, I noticed it seemed like interviewers were being really sympathetic toward her. They kept asking her how she was doing and if she had found a therapist to talk to yet. So this was an open-ended question. I believe it was done to gauge like a baseline with her. And it also like kind of act as a wellness check. I wrote in there, for example, I think if she were to admit she was not okay, it could potentially contribute to some abnormal behavior as she's trying to cope with dating a murderer. But to my surprise, she actually seemed pretty composed throughout the whole video. So at the 30-minute mark, it was openly asked, like, what other new information do you have for me? Because it hadn't actually been apparent as to what she was providing them, even though she had asked for the second interview. So that was an open-ended question that kind of prompted her to give the new information to the officers. And then it would also allow her to share like anything and everything because they had caught her in a few lies. And so the more she talked, the more information she was giving, which was helpful for the investigation. Clarifying questions were also asked at the 36-minute mark when Nicole exaggerated the length of time she looked at houses for Chris. So she had mentioned it had been about a week that she had been looking. And the interviewer actually said verbatim, "You said a week, do you actually mean a whole week?" To which she then replied no and had to elaborate and backtrack. So indicators of truthfulness. To be honest, it was tough to find this in the video as you couldn't see her eye contact or anything like that. And she was a little bit fidgety and on edge the entire time. So I didn't know if that was due to nerves or because she was trying to, if she was being deceitful. But I would say as an indicator of truthfulness would be when Nicole was willingly giving up her phone password and even went as far as to bring in a second phone so she could back everything up and give the original to the police to help with the investigation. At the 20-minute mark as well as other many parts, Nicole was reading what she had texted her friends and what her friends had said back to her. So she was reading these messages verbatim, which led me to think she was being very open and honest. There was some question about whether messages had been deleted or not deleted. But at that point in time, she was showing a lot of honesty and truthfulness with what she had said because some things weren't necessarily painting herself in the best light. For example, she said Chris was really short, which I thought was interesting because, So it is known that truthful people often omit specific times and locations when trying to describe events. So she wasn't giving too much detail in all of her stories, which made me think she was being truthful in some and not in others. So Nicole was asked a question about when Chris had contact with his wife about potentially selling the house, and she could not remember the specific date or time, or even really the month, whether it happened in early August or late July. So she utilized her phone as a prop to jog her memory, and this indicated truthfulness to her claim, and that was at the 32-minute mark of the video. So there was a ton of indicators of deception, but a few examples I pulled out from the video were that although she offered up her phone, there were discrepancies between the text messages on both phones she brought to the interview. So she claims that she didn't know why some messages were on one and some messages were on the other. She said they just kept popping up. She acted very naive. She kind of honestly had a whiny voice the entire interview, and I didn't get that from her baseline. So as the interview went on, she got a little bit more whiny, for lack of better words. So when Nicole was left alone in the room, barely 5 minutes into the video, you can see her talking to herself so loud that it could be heard on camera. And she was talking through what she was doing and being very detailed when she didn't even have to be. So I felt that was an act of deception. She was talking about how she was opening the app store and opening this app and closing this app, which there was nobody even in the room. That wasn't important. She was allowed to have her phone. She brought the phone. So I thought that was pretty interesting. At the 15-minute mark of the video, Nicole is seen from willing to give up her phone over to the investigators. I mean, she did bring in 2 phones. And then she kept asking why they needed that information, saying that there may be stuff on the phone that she doesn't want them to see. She mentioned a bunch of drunk messages between her and her friends. And she tried to change the subject several times, talking about her friend's death, for example, her friend's dad's death, for example. And even evaded the questions being asked by the investigator. At one point, he said verbatim, "I don't care about that," because she had tried to change the subject so much and she wasn't answering what he had asked. Nicole was caught in a lie when asked if she had spoke to her friends about Chris, as she had said no, but the investigators knew of a time when she had a conversation with her friends about them having kids. This occurred at the 21-minute mark. There are other parts throughout the entire video where she is actually caught having conversations around his height, for example, and the one friend even talks about getting caught up in this case in the trial and being a witness, etc. So clearly she was sharing with her friends more than she wanted investigators to believe. Body language observations. So Nicole was sitting across the table from the interviewer and on the same side of the room as the camera. So her body language could actually be monitored quite clearly. Unfortunately, we didn't get a close-up of her face, but I could see her body language from the side profile. So when the interviewer started asking about what was on the phone, and specifically while he had it in his hand, she became a little bit uncomfortable. This was evidenced by her hands moving to her face, and she kind of slouched down with her posture. She uncrossed her legs, and she didn't seem nearly as open as when she had possession of her phone. At one point in the interview, Nicole had asked for water. This could be because her mouth was dry, which is a physiological sign of deception. And even when the question didn't call for it, she would constantly reach for her phone and unlock it on the table and then look back up, and then she'd look back down at her phone. It just seemed like she found comfort in having something in her hand that could draw her eyes away from the interviewer's gaze, which was something I don't think I would have picked up for unless I had been looking for it. At the 1 hour and 26-minute mark, Nicole perked up in her chair and crossed her legs. This is when she was talking about her and her future and what it would look like. So she asked if they could provide her with this name change, and she was worried it would impact her ability to get a job. And this seemed very important to Nicole, and I think that was evidenced by her change in posture. She really did perk up. Interviewing tactics. So the interviewer came off as very approachable. Like I said, they were asking about therapy, etc. It seemed they were doing a lot for Nicole in terms of filling out additional paperwork for her and setting her up with therapy. And apparently the county was even going to pay for it, and that was on account of the investigator filling out the additional paperwork on her behalf, which I thought was quite interesting. Nicole in the interview was seen laughing, very nonchalant at the beginning. He articulated she was free to go at any time and that she is in no way being compelled to be there. Reiterated this interview was her decision, and that if she didn't feel like answering a question, she didn't have to. The interview was at a location where we could watch her body language. Obviously, it was recorded. It was a clean and spacious, non-threatening environment, and she wasn't familiar with it, so it wasn't like her home office or anything like that. So that's a tactic often implemented to help the interviewee, the suspect or whatever, prevent them from lying. The interviewer also did not rush into questions right away and let her speak and set a baseline for her mannerisms so that we could kind of see how she changed as the questions went along. Several times the interviewer left the room. So I thought this was very interesting, and it proved to actually be like a very helpful tactic, as it gave Nicole time to think. And at one point when no one was there, she said to herself, followed by, I got it, I got it, I got it. So she said that out loud to herself in the room by herself. And that was 42 minutes into the video. So that was as if giving her the 12-second break from answering questions allowed her to have this breakthrough on a missing piece. At the 1 hour and 30-minute mark, there was still 40 minutes remaining in the video. Nicole stated that she was ready to go. However, the investigators still had both of her phones. So they were supposedly trying to transfer over the files, and so this takes time. So I wasn't sure if that had been a tactic to keep her talking and to keep her there, as she already made it clear that she wanted to change her name and leave the state. So the longer she was there, the more likely that she was to talk. And I wrote slip up, and not necessarily slip up, but just give them more information that was pertinent to the case. So what stood out to me? A lot stood out actually in this video to me. So I know it said to pick one thing, but these are a few brief ones. So I noticed that no one seemed to treat her like a real suspect. They were all curious, of course, and identified some behavior that made them confused, like why she chose to delete all of her messages with Chris. But it never felt like an interrogation when compared to other interviews I'd viewed. It was Nicole who wanted the second meeting to inform them on pertinent information she had for them, and she didn't remember it until the 42nd minute mark. So that was when she said, oh, I got it. So she had been there over half an hour before she remembered why she was there, which I thought was quite interesting. And then I chose to do this presentation on Nicole opposed to Chris because the idea of delving into her police interviews was really intriguing to me. So I'd heard a lot about her, and at the end of the day, I knew she wasn't charged, but I always kind of wondered what her role in the case was. So she was never truly treated as a suspect in my eyes, and when the interviewing was going on back in 2018, I always wondered if she played a part in what Chris did and why he did it. So he actually said that he's never felt a love like he has felt for her, and in statements and in documentaries since his arrest, he swears Nicole still tries to contact him in jail via written letters. So he says he has blinders on when it comes to Nicole, so I was curious if this love was so strong it could have persuaded him to take sole ownership for conceiving the idea and then physically executing the murders of his family. I know that's pretty deep and obviously not what they were able to prove in court. There wasn't really any evidence, but I just wanted to take a deeper, unobjectified look at the police interviewing through this lens and see if I picked up on anything. And then looking at the comments of the video on her interview, I wasn't the only one that thought Nicole was acting as though she had something to hide. So some went as far to say Nicole was being manipulative, was controlling of the conversation, was playing helpless, and one even said that she was a straight psychopath. So it was interesting that other people had this opinion of her.